In America today, more than 90% of kids use drugs or alcohol before leaving high school. The average age of first use is 12 years old for alcohol and 12.5 for marijuana, ages at which kids have no understanding of the consequences of substance use to their health and emotional development. How could they, if their parents haven't talked about it? Parents have to talk about it, and the sooner they start, the better. One reason for drug and alcohol use among adolescents has to do with the nature of adolescence itself. Growing up is a time to experiment, to try things out for oneself, to see what works and what doesn't, what fits and what does not. Drugs and alcohol have become a part of that process because they are available and acceptable.
Adults haven't been aware enough, we haven't been active enough to prepare ourselves and prepare our children, primarily because we didn't know the problem was coming. But of course the reason kids use drugs are because they're there, and in many cases because their best friend says, hey, come on, have a joint. What, are you afraid of your mother? And if they're not prepared and they don't know what it's going to do to them, it's unfortunately become fairly natural for the kid to say, okay.
You know why they don't have any money. Her dad spends it all on cocaine.
Kids today know a lot more about the world than their parents want them to. But a child's view of reality is still distorted by youth and inexperience. It is the responsibility of adults to put things into proper perspective, including a proper perspective on drugs and alcohol.
I think the attitudes that a parent gives to a young person about drug use and alcohol are also important. Do we think it's just a phase that kids go through, or do we think it's a dangerous process that children should not be involved with? I guess I take the latter. Are we our child's best friend, or are we their parent? You know, I've heard mothers say to me, says, my 16-year-older is my best friend. And I say, well, who's her parent? Because you sometimes can't be both of those roles.
In 1979, we had 1 in 9 high school seniors using marijuana on a daily basis, 3.6 joints a day. They were stoned from the time they got up to the time they went to bed. They couldn't learn. They couldn't function. They now are in the workplace. That was 1979. Today, 1 in 20 were using marijuana on a daily basis. So we've had a significant change with that gateway drug. And what we've had from 1979 has been a massive amount of awareness. Public education that is not education in the classroom, you do this, but educating the parents.
As adults, we know that youth is a time for growth and development. So how do we convince our children that drugs and alcohol will only interfere with that process? First, we have to keep in mind the 3 principal motivations of adolescent behavior. They are to fit in, belong, be accepted by their peers, to grow up or appear grown up, mature, to focus on life in the present, to have fun. Because these motivations underlie nearly all adolescent behavior, including whether or not to use drugs and alcohol, they must learn that not using drugs or alcohol is more acceptable than using them. That instead of demonstrating maturity, drug and alcohol use by adolescents demonstrates a lack of awareness or concern for personal well-being, which is a major sign of immaturity. That though adolescence seems to be the most important part of a young person's life, it only lasts about 8 years and is, in fact, nature's way of preparing us for our lives as adults. And it is parents who must teach them.
Judge going to have this year?
Parent-child communication is often difficult because of the complexity of their respective roles. On the one hand, parents must establish their authority. But on the other, they must demonstrate a willingness to mitigate that authority as children grow and circumstances warrant. Children, for their part, must obey their parents, but need to establish their independence from them as well. Rigid control over a young child
Johnny, Mommy wants you to come and eat your lunch.
needs continuous restructuring as children mature and begin to develop their own ideas based on newly emerging identities.
I like these, Mom.
Oh, Shani,
When exercising their authority, parents would do well to consider the issue. Is it really important? If so, to whom?
The important thing is to communicate clearly and firmly from the parental point of view on a few essential and important things. Nothing that will damage the health and safety of the child. And a parent needs to give no muddied double messages on that. No illegal activities, no drugs and alcohol, no dangerous driving. I mean, if it were swine flu or measles or any other kind of danger to their child, the parent wouldn't hesitate to be clear and communicate that in a very firm way.
It's not easy as a parent to decide how intrusive you should be about setting limits of bedtimes and study and dress codes and what a child eats. And you want to draw the line somewhere so that when you release the child, he's able to make those decisions himself. I guess it's sort of like practicing medicine. You have to keep readjusting. You know, you don't make a final cut on any of those things.
While parents need to set firm guidelines for their children,
Hey, have you finished your homework?
No.
Back in the house. You know the rule.
But they're shooting a movie scene over at Ashley's. Can I just go over there for 1 minute?
a little flexibility makes the more frequent hard line easier for kids to appreciate and accept.
How much homework do you have?
Not much, promise.
Just this once, then.
All right. I don't know. I just feel out of it. Sometimes I feel like my friends like each other better than they like me.
It's just your imagination. Everybody likes you.
No, they don't.
Oh, Diana. Wait, 14 years old, you got your whole life ahead of you. Who cares what your friends think anyway?
And who among us couldn't afford to become better listeners?
I don't know. I just feel out of it. Sometimes I feel like my friends like each other better than they like me.
Yeah, I remember feeling that way.
You do? Did you ever feel like kids didn't like you? I mean, not like you, but like it didn't matter if you were around or not? That's the way I feel. Sort of unnecessary.
We have to recognize that as youngsters begin to change in terms of glands and hormone and growth and emotions, they retreat into themselves and into their world of friends. To be bonded in with your friends makes you feel more normal and accepted at a time that you're worried about your complexion and your body odors and, you know, is my nose as cute as my best friend's, or why are my feet so big, or anything else. You have a tremendous amount of accelerating changes going on, and it is hard for a child to communicate that to their parents. It's something they don't understand that much themselves. I think a parent has to recognize that a child will go through a confusing and difficult and insecure time, and it's so important that they be there. They continue to try to talk to them. They don't worry if the kid, that your daughter goes off to the room and slams the door and, you know, turns on her stereo full blast. She's heard something that you've had to say.
Kids suffer major emotional trauma over things to us that are inconsequential. What they're learning is at a different level, and they see as very serious minor insults or slurs or comments about the way they look or dress, very emotionally tied up with the business of making a good impression on their friends. And little things can be absolutely devastating for them. The business of alcohol and drugs fits, I think, in that process also. It's very easy for a child who's learned to use alcohol and drugs to use those times to seek relief in the chemical. So a parent who's willing to listen and be reassuring and supportive, and not understand sometimes what's going on. And sometimes the kids don't want to tell you what's on their mind. It's just a matter of putting your arm around them and hugging them and listening to them. Parents have to be very attentive to the moods of their kids.
Because adolescence is a traumatic period, fraught with uncertainty and change, young people are subject to mood swings that can baffle adults.
What are you doing watching TV? Get out in the kitchen and help your mother.
But if standards of behavior have been firmly and fairly established, and children are not conforming, there is usually a reason, which a little digging can turn up.
Hey, what's up? Something on your mind? Why don't you go out and help your mom in the kitchen? Then let's talk.
But regardless of how hard we try, we can't hope to be perfect parents.
Jody, have you cleaned your room like I asked you?
Gotta go.
Why do I have to remind you 50 times to do what you're supposed to do around here? And in case you're interested, the stain didn't come out of my white blouse, which means you ruined it, and I'm just furious all over again.
All parents make mistakes, lose control, overreact.
Honey, come here. I'm sorry I was such a jerk.
But we
I
can
have
use
had the
those
right
occasions
mistake,
as
and I get to
opportunities to
clean
create a better understanding between our children and ourselves.
Stand up straight.
It's natural to make demands of our children.
Why are you walking like that? When are you going to start your homework?
But rather than nagging,
Turn off that.
challenge them to be the best they can be. And then give them enough room to meet that challenge on their own. Monitor their growth by setting aside special times to talk about things that matter.
If you've got a problem, let's talk about it.
Promise you won't get mad.
What'd you break?
I cheated on that English test I got an A on. Tommy had the answers before we took it. You're mad, aren't you?
A little surprised. Cheated?
Didn't really mean to, it just sort of happened.
Sort of happened. Cheating isn't something that just sort of happened. People have to make up their mind about it. Who are you thinking of, Sean? You told us that you aced that test. You let us feel proud of you, then you cheated. Which also means that you lied.
But remember, if you want your children to be honest with you, be prepared for things you don't want to hear.
I cheated on that English test I got an A on.
Though parents just naturally expect a lot from their
Tommy had
children,
the answers before we
kids
took it.
also need to learn they can make mistakes.
How's that make you feel?
Bad. I just keep thinking that I let you guys down.
What have you learned from it?
That cheating isn't worth it. Maybe I got an A, but I don't feel good about it.
You really didn't get an A, did you?
What do you mean?
You're gonna have to go in and tell your teacher what you did.
If I told you.
I'm glad you did.
But you're mad.
I'm not mad. I realize we all make mistakes. I'm satisfied you've learned from this one.
Then why have to go in and tell Mrs. Camfrey?
Part of making mistakes is accepting the consequences. She gave you an A because she thought you earned it. You've got to go in and tell her that you didn't. And why?
While pointing out that mistakes are a valuable part of the learning process, parents should also point out that each of us is responsible for his own actions. And it's a responsibility we must learn to accept.
And if she decides to give you an F, that's the price you'll have to pay.
More than anything, I think parents have to understand it's not just enough to say no, because most parents do that fairly easily. They either say, now listen, don't do drugs or alcohol, or they assume that because of the family they are, their children understand that they shouldn't do drugs or alcohol.
You need to start a prevention campaign at a very early age. And I think 5, 6, 7-year-olds they're old enough. You know, the government in its infinite wisdom said you can't talk to young people about drugs until they get to be 12 years of age. Never mind, the average age of first use may be 12, 12 and a half.
Educate your children. Make it your primary responsibility to help your children understand what drugs are and what they do. And with that knowledge and your support, it will give them a better chance of saying no.
Junior high now?
Though parents need to let their children know that drug or alcohol use by kids is unacceptable,
You know the rules. No drug or alcohol use by you or your sister while you're living under this roof.
they need to talk about why.
There is not a single thing known today about marijuana that wasn't known in 1974. It crosses the placenta barrier. It affects a developing embryo. It is fed out of mother's milk into a baby, and a baby can actually get high because the delta-9, the most active component, is in its pure state, stored in the milk. It affects the central nervous system. It affects the reproductive system. It affects the immunological system. It affects biological development. It affects the thinking process. It affects depth perception of the eye. It affects anything that a normal human being must do to perform in a complex society.
I guess most importantly, though, is what it does to the brain of a young person. It interferes with learning. It interferes with motivation. What I guess I'm most concerned about is the susceptibility of young children and teenagers to the risks of experimentation and easy pleasure, so that we see them first taking a drug for pleasure, and then subsequently taking it to deal with problems. And adolescence is a problem-filled time. There's acne, and there are dating problems, and there are fathers that don't understand, and there's algebra. And then the drug itself begins to cause problems as they change friends and become truant and have trouble with school, and eventually become preoccupied with this feeling of pleasure. I guess that, for me, is the most disturbing.
So what do you think being a kid is all about?
Learning how to survive.
That's right. But the key word is learning. And not just how to survive, but how to live a productive life.
And make a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, if that's one of your goals. But how are you going to make a lot of money? Somebody just going to give it to you? No, of course not. I mean, you have to have it together. You have to know how to think, you have to know how to deal with people, you have to know how to deal with problems.
When are you going to learn all this stuff?
No.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why drugs and alcohol are so bad for you. Because you got to learn all this stuff when you're young. You can't learn when you're high. And if you're not learning, you're not growing. And who wants to stop growing when they're still a kid?
Not me.
That's right.
Jimmy's brother says he thinks better when he's high.
Oh, tell him to write down what he's thinking the next time he's high and let you see it. Then you can be the judge.
My first reaction to a young person is, if you think that you can smoke marijuana and you're learning better, try playing Pac-Man when you're high and compare that to your score when you're not high. That'll teach you quicker than anything else.
But all my friends are doing it, and if I don't do it, they're going to think something's wrong with me.
Get some new friends.
I don't want new friends. I like the friends I have.
But they won't be your friends if you don't smoke pot.
They don't see anything wrong with it.
Sounds like you've got a problem.
Mom, it's so hard.
Of course it is, honey. It's called growing up. It means learning to deal with boys, friends, a new body, sweat under your arms. The next time your face is going to break out. Do you think you need more problems?
Oh, right.
Well, I think that's what you should tell your friends. Adolescence is tough enough without drugs and alcohol.
But Melissa says it makes you forget about your problems.
Maybe while you're high. But when you come back down, your problems are still going to be there.
One of the things we have to remember about young people is they learn by experimentation, that they have to try and involve themselves in a certain amount of error along the way. We're worried about some of the errors, like pregnancy and drug use, but other errors are normal, and we have to support kids through a very difficult time. That's how they learn. When they succeed and solve a problem, they grow and they feel good about themselves. It's nice to get through a puzzle and get to the end of it. The problem is that if you don't learn how to do it with what we consider trivial problems and what they consider major, is that when you're older and problems may indeed be more difficult to solve, you don't have any skills, you don't have any practice, you don't have any background to go on. So that we see a society of millions of young people between the ages of 20 and 40 that have never really had to cope or solve and continue to flounder along at a 13-year-old level of development.
How's it going, Guy?
I can't wait till I'm grown up so I don't have to do this stuff anymore.
What is being grown up, do you think?
Being your own person, making your own decisions.
Being independent?
Right.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Since we've been talking a lot about drugs and alcohol lately, people who need drugs or alcohol to have fun or escape reality or deal with their problems, are they dependent or independent?
Dependent.
Yeah, and that's the opposite of independent. So, growing up, is that learning how to use drugs or learning how to live without them?
When I talk to parents at a prenatal visit before they have their baby, or other times, one of the questions I always like to ask is, what do you want your child to be when he or she grows up? And the answer I get distressingly frequently is, I really don't care so much what he becomes as long as he's happy. I think that that's a root of some of our difficulty, is this business of needing to be high all the time, of not willing to postpone gratification. When you ask me what I want my children to be when they grow up, I want my children to feel good about themselves. I want them to live up to their potential.
But a lot of adults drink.
The law makes it a matter of individual choice for adults. There's a big difference between adults and adolescents.
Like what?
You want to be 5'4" for the rest of your life? Baby soft cheeks?
No.
Baby soft cheeks.
Of course not. You're both still in a process of growing. The chemical changes that have to take place to form breasts and hips, make your beard grow, make your voice change. Just getting started. Do you think adding toxic chemicals like alcohol and that stuff that's in drugs is going to do you any good?
Think of doing a chemistry experiment. If you do it the same way every time, are the results going to be the same or different?
Same.
What if you add a new chemical?
Alcohol and drugs are powerful chemicals, guys. They have a powerful effect on young bodies. If you don't believe me, look at some of the Stonies you know. I mean, their chemistry experiment isn't exactly turning out the way it was supposed to.
Our laws make good sense. They're based on the vulnerabilities of the young. That we know that marijuana does interfere with puberty. The energy and sex hormones that develop muscles and strong bones in a young boy are put at risk by a youngster who accumulates marijuana in their system. The loss of testosterone means a boy's voice may not entirely change, or his biceps may not fill out, or his shoulders be as broad. These are very real concerns. It doesn't happen to every kid, but it can happen to any kid, because at that time the healthy production of hormone, the normal surge of sex and energy hormones, if anything interferes with that, you're dealing with a complex and unpredictable time of biological development. Think about when a boy's voice changes. Can you predict when that's going to happen? Do we know what happens if the system is full of marijuana chemicals and there's not as much of a hormone level at that time? Is it a chance a child wants to take, a teenage boy, or their parents, with the healthy development of their body?
The younger you are when you begin using any drug, the more likely you are to become dependent on that drug, whether it's marijuana, whether it's alcohol, anything else. And when a parent tolerates a person, 14 to 15-year-old, that's drinking, they're asking for trouble. They're going to have it.
There have always been things that adults can do that kids can't do. My 13-year-old would love to drive my car. He can't. And it's the same kind of thing. The family needs to be a benevolent dictatorship. Allowing kids to make choices in certain areas is fine, but there are no choices to be made with drugs and alcohol, in our opinion.
They said I was a chicken.
What'd you say?
I told them I didn't want to get messed up.
Sounds like a good answer to me.
They said it won't mess me up. They said it'd make me feel good.
Feel good about what?
Just feel good.
I think maybe your friends have feel good mixed up with get high.
What's the difference?
Getting high is artificial. Any fool can get high. Feeling good is real. It comes from within. Which is better?
I don't know.
All you have to do is look around. Who gets high? Who has a good time without getting high? Are they different kinds of people? Think about it every now and then. And think about what kind of person you want to be.
It is very possible to be a permanent adolescent. It's a situation we're seeing more and more of. That casual joint every now and then removes a very real part of growing up. And for most kids, that's how to love, how to dislike, how to figure out who's insincere and who's true. That can only be learned by an intact young person. In the same way as you don't learn how to shoot a basketball, play the piano, or solve your algebra problems if you're intoxicated.
But she says, how do I know it's bad if I've never tried it?
Does a jury have to witness a crime to convict a criminal?
No.
What do they do?
Look at the evidence.
Okay, what's the evidence on kids and marijuana? What you've read or what your friends tell you?
Why all of a sudden do we have diseases now that are affecting the immunological system at a much earlier age? And I don't mean to scare people, but think about herpes and think about AIDS. When did we have the herpes and when did we have the AIDS? And what drug is very tightly associated with that? You will find that if you have herpes and you are a regular user of marijuana, you quit smoking marijuana, that active herpes case will go into remission much faster. If you have herpes and you're in remission and you can smoke marijuana, it will come out of remission. You look at the AIDS. If you look at all the people that have problems with AIDS, you will find that most of those people, greater than 75%, are heavy marijuana users.
Okay, let's look at it this way. When you're high, you're not really yourself. You not only run the risk of doing or saying things that you'll be sorry for later, but you're not really learning how to act around other people. Haven't I heard you and Melissa say that Chrissy doesn't know how to act around boys?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, those are the kind of things you're supposed to learn when you're young. You can't learn if you're loaded.
But I'm just talking about having fun.
Sweetheart, there's nothing wrong with having a good time, as long as it's harmless. But you see, getting high isn't harmless. It's being out of control, and being out of control can be dangerous. More than that, just isn't cool. Honey, youth is a time to learn how to get control of yourself, not lose it.
We're asked quite frequently what kind of youngster gets into drugs, and there is no typical profile, but we have interviewed about 200 young people who were in treatment to find out what was their background, was there anything different about them, and basically there really isn't. They're everyone's kids. 60%, for instance, of the kids we interviewed were from families with median incomes of $40,000. They had used marijuana, PCP, alcohol, cocaine. The average beginning age was 12. And some of the things that they got into while they were into drugs are truly frightening. And these are just average American kids who the only thing different about them is that they did do drugs. Most had used 2 years before their parents were aware. 95% of these youngsters, who by the way ranged from 11 to 17 years in age, 95% had committed misdemeanors, 68% had committed felonies, very serious crimes, and most of them were undetected. 75% of the boys burglarized houses, 81% of the group were runaways, 33% of the girls burglarized, and 97% of the whole group shoplifted. They all committed vandalism. Now, I think we can see from this profile and these series of statistics that if we could pull drugs and alcohol out of these kids' lives, we could pull out a lot of other problems as well.
If drugs are so bad, how do people like to do them?
Drugs give people a lift, at least for a little while.
What's wrong with that?
Well, the effect doesn't last. Worse than that, your body has to pay a price.
What do you mean?
Come here. Let me show you. Okay. Let's say you're here. You get high on cocaine, for instance, and you're here. You stay there forever?
No, you come down.
Yeah. To where you were before?
Yeah.
No. Lower. See? That's the price you pay. If you keep using the drug, well, the price starts to go up. The highs aren't as high, the lows get lower. Eventually, you wind up using the drug just to feel normal.
But that doesn't happen on every drug.
It does to one degree or another. Because there's no such thing as a free lunch. You ever heard that expression before?
It means you don't get something for nothing.
That's right. It's a fact of life.
But a lot of rock stars and movie stars do drugs.
Yeah, anybody can do drugs. And some people get away with it for a while. Nobody gets away with it for very long.
I think that the child who begins to experiment with any psychoactive drug does not do it with the intention of losing control. I have a friend my age who wants to give up cigarettes, for instance, and started with exactly that thing, that she was going to quit once she knew she couldn't quit, sort of backwards reasoning. It's an insidious process that begins very slowly, and you are lured in at different speeds to what we call chemical dependency, and then escape becomes very difficult.
Talking to your kids honestly and often about the realities of drug or alcohol use can help shape proper attitudes at an early age.
So you never had a beer before, huh?
Teaching them how to say no to drugs and alcohol can provide them with the tools they need to have the courage of their convictions.
Don't tell Mom. Hey, what are you...
We have some beer. Do you want some?
No, I've got to go to my piano lesson.
I don't want to.
Come on, it won't hurt you.
I don't want to.
What, are you afraid?
I don't want to.
I'll have to think about it.
Are you going to Kevin's party?
No, Molly and I are going to a shop.
I have a right to say no.
Want to go smoke a joint? Wait till you get on your math test.
I've already decided not to.
How come you smoke pot so much? You know it can cause lung cancer.
I think drugs are dumb.
So do I. I think you're a chicken for doing it.
But Kelly's mother lets her stay out until 12. Why can't I stay out until 12?
Finally, Combat peer group influence by creating a peer group of your own.
Mrs. Patterson, this is Julie Thomas, Jody's mother.
The parents of your children's
Listen,
friends.
I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm
Parents can not only learn from one another, but working together, they have much greater influence than parents who try to do the job alone.
Kids have peer pressure. Parents need to have peer pressure. So our bottom line message to parents is get yourself educated, pick up that telephone, and get together with the parents of your child's friendship circle. Know the kids, but more importantly, know the parents. Help them get educated and then set down some guidelines.
A good peer group is a wonderful thing to help a person grow up straight and healthy and in the right direction. A bad peer group can take a youngster right down the tubes very easily. But parents need peer pressure too. They need peer support too. And I think particularly in the contemporary world where people are very isolated and fragmented, it's so important to build an extended family out of whatever's out there. That means out of the single parents of your daughter's or son's friends, out of divorced parents, out of intact couples, out of swingers or conservative parents. Recognize that if your children run around together and are exercising a peer pressure among themselves, then you as parents need to link up with those other parents and try to make some consistency, some firmness, be able to share time and energy, particularly for single parents. It's very hard to raise a teenager by yourself.
Despite the best efforts of parents, teachers, and counselors, hundreds of thousands of kids get into trouble with drugs and alcohol each year because they are still available and acceptable. How does a parent know if his child is among them? Following are some of the signs: school tardiness, truancy, falling grades, declining motivation or energy or self-discipline, loss of interest in activities or hobbies, long or short-term forgetfulness, short attention span, irrational anger or hostility, irritability, sullen behavior, disappearance of money or valuables, changes in or evasiveness about friends, unhealthy appearance, bloodshot eyes, changes in dress or grooming, trouble with authorities, unusually large appetite, use of Visine or room deodorizers or incense, use of drug-related graphics and slogans, peculiar odors, butts, seeds, or leaves in ashtrays or pockets, display of drug paraphernalia. If you feel your child may be using drugs or alcohol, there are some excellent organizations from whom to get help. Among them, the National Federation of Parents for Drug-Free Youth, Pride, Families in Action,
Probably the central theme of what the parents can do, number one, is educate themselves, and there's some easy reading to do that. Number two is make a firm stand in the family, let everybody in the family know exactly where you stand on drugs. Number three is give some alternatives. Make a decision that the kids are going to go on vacation with the family. They're going to go to the beach or do something. Number four, I think the parents have a right to look in their kids' room. And one of the things that kids do is they hide stuff. And if you see a Coca-Cola can or a Pepsi can or an Oilsome can that stays there in the windowsill, unscrew the bottom. Learn about the paraphernalia. You do these things, and I think you've got about a 95 or a better percent possibility of your child growing up, dealing with the problems of adolescence without having to deal with the problems of adolescence and concomitantly deal with the problems of alcohol and drug abuse.
Adolescent drug and alcohol use is a real problem and a national concern, but it can be overcome. Research has shown that the better informed young people are about drugs and alcohol and their effects, the more likely they are to avoid them. As a parent, you've just taken the first step toward being a source of that information. Keep going.